803-450-0086. All right, I've been away for a week. And just as I was leaving, I'm not saying the bottom fell out of college football by any means, but there was a shockwave. Sort of like the shockwaves out of the Northeast Columbia area. It was seismic. Southern Cal, UCLA, taking their talents to the Big Ten. And I wrote an opinion piece over on our website, put the .com on it, doggone it, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. I wrote an opinion a couple of days after the 4th. I actually started penning said article on the 4th about a merger, if you will. And some people said, Swanee, your idea would be a takeover. I said I felt like the Big Ten and the ACC should merge. And you say, hold on now. There are a lot of teams. There are a lot of teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference that the Big Ten might not want or need. And that's where some of that is where some of the naysayers or even the national pundits think that this idea wouldn't be a good one, right? Because whoever you bring into your league is getting another piece of the pie and needs to be a team that would add value. They would be a value-created team into your league. But see, I have a bigger picture on this whole ordeal. I see a bigger approach. And so I went with, and I could have renamed the Big Ten. Like, I could have done that, but I didn't, simply because, and maybe I should have, because we'd be looking at an advancement to 32 teams. 32. So right now, as we sit, we have two leagues, the SEC and the Big Ten, with 16 teams. Now, I think personally that's a pretty sweet spot. I think that would be an ideal place to be. And I've said in the past right here on this program, I think 16-team leagues is probably the direction we're headed. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the ACC will continue to survive in a scenario like that. That is not what this means. As a matter of fact, I could make the argument that the ACC and the SEC and the Big Ten and these leagues will be called something completely different at that point in time. But I want you to imagine a couple of scenarios here, because I think they are all reasonable and they are all mentioned in our article, called a Big Ten merge would be a gut punch to SEC fanboys. And look, if you're not an SEC fanboy, I'm not talking to you right now when that, or at least when that article came out. This is about the SEC, that fan that cares more about his conference maybe and the success of his league than his own team. And maybe some of our fine feathered friends are included in that right here in the Midlands, but that's not who, that's not who this is totally about, because the fact of the matter remains, the Atlantic Coast Conference, along with Notre Dame and another team, could easily slide into the third spot of a 16-team league scenario. And then that would leave the remaining Big 12 teams and the remaining Pac-12 teams to come together. I believe that number right now would be 21 if my notes are correct. And those 21 teams would have to hash out who's going to be in the 16. And in my book, the simplest way to hash that out is to eliminate the new teams that came into the Big 12, which would be BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, the guys that just joined essentially, get rid of them, and then take the traditional Power 5 programs and figure out who's got to go. And I say Kansas. Sorry, guys. Go play basketball in the Big Ten, in the Big East. It's a lot of bigs, too. I'll credit the ACC and the SEC for this. Rarely do I make a mistake on their name. Occasionally, for whatever reason, although SEC and ACC aren't really significant in the way they come out of your mouth or roll off of your tongue, I can still sometimes intertwine those, and I think I did a few minutes ago. all that being said, here's my scenario. I think that if you look at the goal of the Big Ten, when they added Southern Cal and UCLA, like what in your mind, I want you to take a second here. Not if you're driving, don't close your eyes. But if you're sitting at home, listening to the podcast, watching the video, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to answer this simple question. Why did the Big Ten add Southern Cal and UCLA? All right, do you have your answer? It's probably, most of you probably said, because they want to compete or be better than the SEC. Like, that's the reason they reached out and brought those two schools in. This was not about eliminating the Pac-12. This had nothing to do with the Big 12. No real effect on the ACC. This was a shot from the Big Ten to better themselves and become the preeminent football program in college football, or the preeminent football league in college football, putting them above the SEC in their minds. Again, we could talk about UCLA, their lack of football success. We could talk about Southern Cal and the fact that they haven't won a national title since 03, 04-ish, nearly 20 years, okay? And then we can recognize, and rightfully so, we can recognize right here on the program that if this move is about college football solely, and I know it's not completely, but if it is about becoming the preeminent conference in college football, then why not just kick it up another notch? Why not just add another league? You hear a lot of talk about Notre Dame and the decision that they will make and whether that's to go to the Big Ten. And I'm not denying that Clemson and Florida State and Miami might be great fits in the SEC. Like, we could talk about who does what and where they should end up. But if the goal of the Big Ten was simply to surpass the SEC and begin to maybe even dictate to the SEC the terms of what college football is going to look like, then I say that the bigger move would be to advance in with the Atlantic Coast Conference, along with Notre Dame and one of two other schools, either West Virginia, which geographically makes a lot of sense to me, or if you want to fire another shot into the SEC's territory at that point, maybe you go with someone like Oklahoma State to put them into the, put Oklahoma in that viewing market into the mix for this new league. Now, granted, you would be gaining in the Big Ten tremendous markets. Tremendous markets. Also, you would be gaining a foothold and a footprint in the SEC's territory. Like, the one reason, if you hear people say, well, Clemson, they're never going to add Clemson to the SEC is because, well, they have a team in South Carolina, or Georgia Tech. They have a team in Georgia. The Big Ten doesn't have that, do they? This would give the Big Ten the advantage of being in the Southeast. This would give the ACC the advantage of having a supreme football conference. All this grant of rights, mumbo jumbo. If the entire league left, grant of rights to who? There wouldn't be an ACC remaining. And so at that point, this merger makes a lot of sense. Additionally, the Big Ten would then own the markets in 7 of the top 10 television markets in the country. New York, the number 1 market. Los Angeles, the number 2 market. Chicago, the number 3 market. Philadelphia, the number 4 market. Atlanta, the number 7 market. Washington, D.C., the number 9 market. Boston, the number 10 market. Additionally, Tampa St. Pete, which is 13th. Minneapolis St. Paul, 14th. Detroit is 15th. The Orlando, Daytona Beach, Melbourne area, 17th. Miami, Fort Lauderdale is 18th. And Cleveland and Akron markets as well are the 19th markets. It would be a powerhouse. And I don't care what you name them. You can have the Big Ten North, the Big Ten Atlantic, the Big Ten South, the Big Ten West, the Big Ten East. You could come up with your own name, the Big 32, whatever it is. But in this scenario with Notre Dame and another team, West Virginia or Oklahoma State, now, in my opinion, as wild as it seems, the Big Ten has achieved the goal that they hoped to achieve by adding UCLA and Southern Cal. Now, you might say to me, Swanee, that's great, but why go to 32? Because that's where we're headed. I don't see a logical format outside of 4 16-team leagues, 64 teams playing big boy college football. I have been willing in the past to stretch to 80. But if the belief becomes there, it is going to be more like professional football, then I think the smart scenario is to just go ahead and push in to a 32-team league. That would leave the SEC at that point, logically so, to go out and add 16 of the remaining teams, whoever they are, and become 2 32-team leagues, the Big 32, the SEC 32. I don't care. You call them the American Football 32 and the National Football 32. And those 2 leagues would then play. And again, if the Big Ten and, again, the ACC decide that they want to do something together, it just makes sense. The Atlantic Coast Conference fans, you know you've dealt with this for years from the SEC fans. Hey, man, it's not the SEC. Well, now you'd be in a 32-team league that is more powerful than the SEC, that has Ohio State, it has Michigan, it has Southern Cal, UCLA, Clemson, Miami, Florida State, Virginia Tech. I mean, you go Penn State, on and on through the list of teams, right? Wisconsin. Now you're going Nebraska. Now you're going, wow, that's a true football conference. Even if you've got some Northwesterns in there, some Dukes in there, but the basketball value of that league as well is tremendous. And so the reason this, in my opinion, is smart, grant of rights, that's gone. ACC, Big Ten merger gives the Big Ten territory in the Southeast, gives the ACC, gives the, you know what? I've forgotten the big names. Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, and/or West Virginia. But again, Notre Dame, another huge piece of this puzzle. You get all of that. You get the territory in the South, right in the heart of the SEC's territory. And you're probably the proactive league that has made a great decision to move towards what the future of this sport is going to be. If the goal is to one-up the SEC, if the goal in the Atlantic Coast Conference is to be in the supreme football conference by comparison to the SEC, then a merger between the ACC and the Big Ten makes a ton of sense. Plus, it would then force the SEC, if they were going to stay in the running, or if they wanted to continue to attempt to be at the top of college football, it would not allow that league to get the Clemsons and the Miamis or the North Carolinas, right? Like all of a sudden, the SEC is backpedaling, right? Is that not the Big Ten's goal? ACC fans, would you not like to see the SEC backpedaling a little bit? The SEC is then trying to figure out who are the other 16 teams that we would need to add. And mind you, if you go ahead and get Oklahoma State instead of West Virginia, and again, our article's up, put the .com on it, doggone it, Clemson, sportstalk.com. If you were to go and get Oklahoma State or even a program in the state of Texas, then all of a sudden you're encroaching even further into the SEC's territory. And you leave the SEC with the decision to add Oregon, which I'm sure they would, Arizona, Arizona State, California, Colorado, Oregon State, Utah, Stanford, Washington State. You see what I'm saying? TCU, Texas Tech. It's not nearly as ideal. The names are not nearly as ideal as the ones that a merger between the Big Ten and the ACC could produce. The merger of these two leagues to go to 32 teams, along with Notre Dame, maybe Oklahoma State, maybe West Virginia, truly encroaches on the SEC. It creates a league that makes the SEC second fiddle in football for the first time in a long time. And the SEC would have to figure out who they are going to add. If you don't do that as the Big Ten, the SEC might very well end up with Clemson and Florida State and Miami and North Carolina. And the Big Ten, you're going to end up picking up the Syracuses, the Boston College, and the SEC is still going to be the dominant league. What was your end goal when you fired the shot to bring in Southern Cal and UCLA? If it's TV markets, I got a deal that works great for you, Big Ten. If it's to move into the SEC's territory or perhaps be the top college football conference in America, I got a deal for you, Big Ten. Go read it right now on our website, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. 803-450-0086. Follow the show on Twitter. We'll hit a quick break and bounce back with more right after this. Stay with us.